Hello everyone and welcome to this next lecture in the Python programming course. In this particular lecture, we will get an opportunity to learn about static typing and dynamic typing and also get a chance to see whether Python is a statically typed language or a dynamically typed language. So let's get started. Let's see what all we'll get to learn in this particular lecture. First of all, we'll see what is static typing, and then we'll see the advantages and disadvantages of static typing. Next up, we will understand what is dynamic typing, and similarly, we'll go over the advantages and disadvantages of dynamic typing. Then we will understand the differences between static typing and dynamic typing. And finally, we will understand if Python is a statically typed language or a dynamically typed language. So, as we discussed here, let's first go and see what is static typing. Static typing is when the data type is known at the compile time. Earlier, we learned about data types and we also learned about compilation and interpretation of code. So a language is said to be statically typed when the type of the data that we declare in the code is known at the compilation time. Since we know the data type that is declared at the compilation time, what that will eventually result in is that the code will not be compiled or interpreted until all the errors are corrected. Well, there might be a type mismatch kind of an error where we are trying to perform operations on two different data types. There might be other errors also. In a statically typed language, the errors, unless they are corrected, the code will not be compiled or interpreted further. For example, we have Java, C and C++ as statically typed languages. In this below code that is written here, we have couple of variables or labels that we have defined here with some value, and we have defined their data type. This variable first has a data type of integer, which is defined by the keyword int, and this variable name has a data type of string, which is defined by the keyword string. Variables. That's a new word. What is a variable? A variable is a symbolic name that is a reference or a pointer to a memory location. We will learn about variables in future lectures. Coming back to the code here, after defining these variables, we are simply printing them out using Java's inbuilt function for printing. That's system.out.println. So here we got a chance to understand what is static typing. Now let's move on further and understand the advantages and disadvantages of static typing. Let's see the advantages first. As we saw earlier in static typing, unless and until the errors that are caught during the compilation are corrected, the compilation or interpretation doesn't move further, which gives us a brilliant advantage with static typing that trivial errors can be caught very early as during or before the compilation. This will help us in developing a safe and better program. Let's see the next advantage. Static typing can help us produce memory-optimized machine code. Now we learned earlier that data type in a static typing is known at the compilation time. Well, since the type of the data that we declare in the program is known beforehand by the computer will be in a better position to calculate the memory requirement of each data and then come up with a machine code that will be optimal as far as memory allocation is concerned. These 2 points together give us the third advantage, which is programs typically perform better at execution time. Since we catch trivial errors early and also produce a memory-optimized machine code, the program eventually will be a better program compared to other program which doesn't have these advantages. So, now that we have looked at the advantages, Let's go and have a look at the disadvantages. Well, for the first one, the overhead of defining the data type explicitly is a major disadvantage of static typing. Since one needs to know the data type that is going to be used in the code, they have the responsibility to explicitly define the data type while writing the code. Moving on to the next disadvantage, variable cannot be reassigned to a different data type. Once a variable has been defined with a data type and a value has been assigned to it, the same variable or label cannot be assigned with a different data type and used for another purpose. Now that we have seen the advantages and disadvantages of static typing here, let's move on and go over to learn dynamic typing. Dynamic typing is the one where the data type is known at runtime. What it means is basically when the program is being running or is under execution, that is the time when the type of the data is decided based on whatever we have written in the code. Now that is some good news for developers because they don't need to specify the data type explicitly as they were doing in static typing. Based on the data that we have written or defined in the code, the data type is finalized when the program is run. The program is compiled or interpreted successfully till the time we encounter errors. That means bugs are caught after compilation or interpretation. Now that we have seen what is dynamic typing, let's see an example here. We have Python and JavaScript as dynamically typed languages, and in this particular Python code, we can see that we have two variables defined similar to how we were defining in the static typing example. However, we do not need to specify their data types explicitly here. One of the variables has an integer value assigned to it, while the other variable has a string value assigned to it. And we do not need to specify the type of the data explicitly, and that is what is dynamic typing. Coming back to the code, next up we are simply printing the two variables using the Python print function. So we understood what is dynamic typing. Moving on, let's see dynamic typing advantages and disadvantages. Let's see the advantages first, as we saw in static typing also. The first advantage here would be that there is no overhead of defining the data type explicitly. Well, we saw this just a while ago. The data type does not need explicit definition during the writing of the code, and the same is adjudged during the runtime. Moving on to the next advantage. Variable reassignment to a different data type is possible. Since we are not explicitly defining the type of the variable or tying a particular variable to a data type, we can definitely reassign the same variable to a different data type by assigning a different value to it. The computer at runtime will be smart enough to come up with the new data type for the same variable. Now let's see the last advantage. Runtime type information is helpful for features like dynamic dispatch. Well, new words: runtime type information and dynamic dispatch. What are they? Runtime type information is a mechanism that allows the type to be determined during program execution, whereas dynamic dispatch is the process of selecting the implementation of a particular operation that needs to be executed during runtime. We will learn about all these in future lectures. Now that we have seen the advantages, let's go over and see a bit of disadvantages also. Let's see the first disadvantage. Type errors are not detected earlier. The type mismatch kind of errors, where we might be performing operations on data that are of different types, will not be detected unless and until we execute the program. Finally, let's see the last disadvantage. Less memory optimized machine code. Since the type of the data that we need in the program is not known unless and until we execute the program, the machine code that is produced is less optimal as far as memory allocation is concerned. The memory is being allocated as and when the type of the data is determined while running the program. So here we got to learn about the advantages and disadvantages of dynamic typing. Now that we have learned about static typing and dynamic typing, let's go ahead and compare them head to head. First of all, under static typing, type checking is done at compile time. That is, the type of the data that we have defined is checked at the compilation phase. Whereas, in dynamic typing, the same type checking is done when the program is executed. Moving on, in static typing, explicit type declaration is needed. As a developer, it's our responsibility to explicitly define the type of the data that we are writing in the program. The same explicit type declaration is not needed in dynamic typing. And then, errors are detected earlier in static typing. We learned this earlier that in a statically typed program, the errors are detected during the compilation phase, and unless and until those errors are corrected, the program is not compiled at all, which enables us to detect those errors earlier before the program is actually executed. Contrary to this, in dynamic typing, the errors are not detected unless and until the program is actually executed. And then, in static typing, variable reassignment is not possible. That is, once we have defined the type of a variable in the program, the same variable cannot be assigned with a different data type at all. In dynamic typing, however, the variable reassignment is possible and the same variable can be assigned to a different value of a different data type. And finally, in static typing, a more memory optimized machine code is produced. Since we define the type of the data that is needed in the program beforehand, the computer is in a better position to calculate the required memory by the program and thus comes up with a more memory optimized machine code in the case of static typing. Whereas, in case of dynamic typing, less memory optimized machine code is produced. The computer comes across the type of the data that we need in the program at execution time and accordingly calculates the memory for them. Eventually, the total memory needed by the program is also calculated at runtime, resulting in less memory optimized machine code. So here we understood about the differences between static typing and dynamic typing. And finally, let's see whether Python is a statically typed or dynamically typed language. Python is a dynamically typed language. We do not need to explicitly define the type of the variable that we need in the program. The computer doesn't need to know about the type of the variable until the code is executed. It allocates the memory at runtime as per the type of the variable and then binds the variable name to that memory location. We have the same code as an example that we saw earlier, where we define two variables, one with an integer value and the other with a string value. Now both of them will have the memory allocated with respect to the values that are assigned to them and which will eventually determine their data types. Finally, the variable names, that is first and name, will bind to the memory locations which have been allocated for them. So here we learned that Python is a dynamically typed language, and we also saw an example for the same. So that will be all for this lecture. Thank you.